Hi, my name is Chris Hagmann. I started Momentum almost 5 years ago. I started in July of 2018. So this is a great opportunity to kind of see what the future may hold in the future, in the long run, I guess. I am, as I mentioned, I work at a company called Power Auctions, and they do a web application that does custom auctions for specialty products, or the auctions that are a little bit different than your typical auctions that have a lot more heavy duty math and algorithms involved than just highest bid wins. I graduated in October of 2018, started working in January of 2019. So I was on the job market for about 3 months, and have started at a company in Durham called Simon Solutions. It was a consultancy agency that did custom products for clients. And in September of last year, I moved over to a new company. That is a company that's based in DC, and I'm working remotely from Durham.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that background. So before your career in tech and before you kind of decided to join Momentum, what was your background in? What did you do? Just kind of a background about yourself pre-Momentum.
Okay. So all my degrees are in chemical engineering. My original life plan that I was working towards since graduating high school was to be a college professor. I found out that I absolutely hate doing research, and that while teaching universities exist, they still require you to have a PhD, which required me to then try to force my way through a PhD program that definitely did not meet my cater to my skill set, I guess, as you might call it. The one fortunate aspect of graduate school is that my research involved trying to tell computers what to do. And so I ended up having to learn the basics of Python in order to basically try to tell the computer what to do. It was very straightforward coding. It was very much like, read this file, send it to this program, read the output, and print it to the screen. But that was kind of enjoyable getting into that. And when the inevitable happened and I ended up having to leave grad school, I started work at a company called Epic Systems, where I worked as a SQL developer. At least that was my title. About 95% of my work was in a very archaic language called Cache or mumps. And I got to do a little bit of programming in that regards, but again, it is a very weird language based from the 60s that does not really look like any language that you would actually want to use or that people actually used in this day and age. And so when I moved on from that to move to North Carolina to be closer to family, I took the opportunity to say, well, I've now done 2 coding adjacent things. Wouldn't it be kind of nice if I actually did coding proper instead? And that's when I joined Momentum. I did the backend. At the time, they had a backend stack and a front-end stack. And I did the backend stack, specializing in the APIs, or application programming interface. Basically, what the computer does to do all the calculations before sending information to the front end to make it all pretty. That was a great opportunity. At the time, it was a 12-week program, which meant the final project we had a whopping 2 weeks to go from concept to demo. Needless to say, I'm very envious of the new structure where you get 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the program you sign up with. Because while I'm so very proud of our project, it was not most polished because it was very much get things done, get something out. It was a very definition of the minimum viable product. And so that was my life prior to Momentum.
Awesome. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar, our program is now 16 weeks and it's split into 4 phases. So students have a little bit more time for their final project, which I'm sure is appreciated. So I know you mentioned that you had pre-momentum, some experience kind of playing around with coding and stuff like that. But what was it that made you decide that it was time for a career change and that it was going to be tech or software development?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that in kind of looking at my resume and looking at the jobs that I wanted to apply to, I kept on finding myself looking at job postings that were software development. I would initially like chemical engineer with some chemical engineering, and then I would basically kind of subconsciously or very blatantly disregard anything that was strictly chemistry based. And I just it just was one of those things that I kept on revolving back to. Oh, do I get to actually do any coding while I'm doing chemical engineering? And it was kind of like, oh, maybe I don't actually like chemical engineering. I should probably should address that aspect of things. I think the other thing that really kind of got me interested in tech is that I really like building things, but I'm very physically clumsy. So like, I like to be able to like do something like I built that, but like I've tried, I took wood shop in high school and the resorts were not pretty. And I've tried a lot of like creative outlets that are, the classical ones, like, playing guitar or piano, playing an instrument or, building stuff, like again, woodworking, metalworking, all of this other stuff. And I'm just not physically dexterous. And so it would never turn out the way that I wanted. But with computer programming, I'm not good at typing. Again, physically dexterous, not my strong suit. But as long as I fix the typos, what I imagine is something that can actually come out on the screen, and I can force the computer to do the picture perfect, making things pretty for me instead of having to do it myself. And it was kind of really nice to be able to actually be able to point to something like, I built this is something I did, and it can be useful to other people.
I love that. Yeah, I am also not very good with kind of dexterity, and it's interesting. I like that kind of analogy that you like to build things, but it's easier for you to do it through programming. So next up, I want to focus a little bit more on momentum, kind of how you found momentum, why momentum. I know why you chose to switch career paths, and it was kind of you were gravitating towards software development, but just how did you end up with momentum?
That is a great question. As I mentioned before, when I part of the kind of taking a career shift involved me moving from Wisconsin down to North Carolina. By a weird series of events, my entire family, though none of us native North Carolina, have all ended up in Durham. And so when I moved out here, I spent some time looking for jobs, and again went into all the jobs I want to do, I am not qualified for, and so wouldn't it be great if I did some retraining. Another fun tidbit about myself is that I have ADHD, and recently was diagnosed with level 1 autism. And so why I had gone the route of trying to collect lots of online courses on teach yourself how to code, that just wasn't really in my realm of feasibility. I'm not the most self-directed person. And so while I'm very good at going, aye, sure, and fulfilling tasks, coming up with trying to follow a curriculum independently was just not my strong suit. So in looking around, I found momentum. And after talking to Jessica and Amy and a few other people that do not work there anymore, I decided to take the leap, and it was a great decision.
Love to hear it. So now we can kind of get into more juicy bits now that we have your background and kind of why you decided to make the career change to tech. Let's talk about what it was like to learn how to code, what surprised you the most, what was the most challenging, what did you enjoy the most?
Okay. So the thing that I really kind of again enjoyed the most was, especially in languages. So when I went through the course, it was that we were doing Ruby. I do have experience in Python, which I believe is what the standard curriculum is nowadays. But in both of those sort of languages, because of the fact that you have the ability, there's a very tight feedback cycle. And so if you're like, I want to sort this list of numbers numerically, so I might have like 3, 2, 5, 1, 8, and I want to actually put it in numerical order. I could try to figure out the problem, and I could run it, and I could get instant feedback like, oh look, this is in the correct order now, or no, this is not in the correct order. And just that ability to I guess get my hands dirty. I think in a lot of subjects, the general advice is always to measure twice, cut once, do lots of research, visually inspect it multiple times and then actually run, actually do the thing. But with coding, especially in the languages that we talk about here, it's very much, you could just throw something on the wall and run it and go, huh, my idea did not work because of this, this, and this, and not, instead of having to just, oh, I guess I'm just going to assume that the experts know what they're doing and just, copy code from the internet and assume that is the only way of doing things. And I think that's one of the things that also kind of surprised me is, again, having a little bit of having some college in my background, especially engineering, there are a lot of 2 + 2 is 4. There's no way around that. There is a correct answer and a correct way of getting that answer. Why, we can get into, one answer being, faster to calculate than the other one. At the end of the day, there's lots of different ways of writing the code and solving the problem. And so there's still that ability to kind of be creative with how you approach things and looking at things at different angles. As far as how it was to learn how to code, I think that kind of goes back to being able to, just get my hands dirty and just try to run things. I think the other thing that was just really helpful for me in learning how to code was that I would basically try to get the answer, so make the thing work. And once I got it working, then I would start trying to play around with it, seeing if I could, if there was anything I could cut out, or if there was any better way of writing this statement, and kind of going back and critiquing my own work after getting to the point that it was functionally correct, seeing if there was anything I could do better to make my code easier to read and the like.
So I think there's a lot of takeaways from what you just said and kind of your experience. Definitely a lot that could be learned for those who are interested in coding or those who are currently learning how to code. But additionally, I'm just wondering if there is any advice that you would give to those looking to learn how to code, or even currently maybe in the program.
One of the things that I would potentially recommend is, by all means, you definitely asking for help on some concepts is great, but as far as doing the actual implementation of your assignments, putting all the pieces together is something that you definitely gain a lot more from doing it yourself. But then going back to once you have a correct answer that does what you need to do functionally, I think one of the most useful things to do is just read other people's code. because that kind of goes back to again that like 4 + 4, I mean 2 is equal to 4. Like in math, there is only one correct answer, but I can almost guarantee you that in a class of 20 students, even if all of them take the same input, return the same output, you're probably going to have at least 15 different ways that people did it. And in a lot of cases, your way might be the best. In some cases, you might read someone else and they had a much more easily understood way of doing it. And kind of learning, kind of reading code, especially reading code that's definitely on your level of understanding is, I think, the most helpful thing to do, because frankly, my job is about 80% reading code and then 20% actually adding new features to the code once I figure out where the heck I'm supposed to actually add the new code.
I think that's really great advice. Definitely true. So you've graduated from Momentum, you're on the job in October 2018, you're on the job hunt for about 3 months, you said.
Mhm.
Can you walk us through a little bit of the job hunt process, interview process,
Yeah,
that job, and then also for, I suppose you switched jobs, so just in general, the job hunt process and interview process post-grad and for a tech career.
okay. So I guess, ironically speaking, the very first job I applied to while I was still at Momentum is the job I ended up taking. However, due to a series of fun events, that the time between job application submission and first interview was about 2.5 months, and between first interview to job extension, job offer extension was about another month. Your mileage will vary, but of course, because of such large time gaps in the steps of that process, I applied to a number of jobs. I think one of the things that I kind of saw as a kind of repeating pattern when I first starting to apply to jobs was there is a large gap between what is expected of you and I guess what is reasonably expected of you and what is on the job description. What I mean by that is there's a classic joke posting that gets passed around in forums where there was a person who developed a Python library called Fast API, and so he was the inventor. He created from scratch, and he jokingly posted a job listing, says like, I guess I'm not qualified for this because they were looking for a Fast API developer who had 10 years of experience, and he had just wrote it last year. And so he was just joking that even as the creator, he's not qualified for this job because the job posting is just completely out of touch with things, and that's very common. A lot of times, the head of development will tell HR that I want a developer that has lots of experience doing this, and they're like, oh, lots of experience. It's like 5 to 10 years, got it. And they put something on the job listing, and it's not feasible at all. But on the and so I guess the thing I would just recommend is just read the job description for what it is. Like they're very usually upfront with saying that you're going to be working with these languages doing these sort of stuff, and just kind of think to yourself, are those things that you feel like you know how to do, or that you would be eager to learn how to do, and move forward from that. Because especially with in this kind of day and age of economy, there are a lot of companies that would be willing to bring on a junior developer even if they weren't planning on doing it, because they have they have extra bandwidth to do some mentoring, and frankly, junior developers cost a lot less than someone with 10 years of experience. And so being able to bring someone in as a junior and train them up in 6 months is a much better bargain than trying to find that elusive 5 years of experience in this exact tech stack. So don't be basically, in short, don't be too disheartened by the potential lack of title postings with the word junior in the title, and just more focus on what you want to be doing. And if you feel like you would be happy doing what the job posting says, regardless of how many years they have, because if it really is that big of a deal, they just won't respond, and you can move forward from that. Sorry.
Can you also walk us through a little bit, say you've applied to these jobs to meet the requirements, or you feel that you
Mhm.
could and you're willing to learn if you aren't meeting all of the requirements, and you've now made it to the interview stage. Can you
Okay.
walk us through a little bit of what that was like, at least in your experience?
So in my experience, interviews usually have, I'll go with like, I guess, 3 classic parts. One is usually a culture fit, where they're just basically talk about you and your hopes and dreams, and all the soft skill fuzzy stuff that they want to make sure that you get along with people. Then there's usually a generic technical interview, where they are mainly asking, I wouldn't call it trivia, because everything they ask is relevant and things that you actually would do, but just kind of things to kind of ensure that you didn't just chat GTP something or making up things on the thought. And then usually the last thing that happens is there's usually a whiteboarding or a live coding interview, where you actually implement code. I will say, when it comes to whiteboarding or whiteboarding interviews, that everyone I've ever talked to, the main point of those interviews are to test thought processes. And so I've done multiple interviews, and with one of them resulting in a job offer, where I literally just basically talked the entire time and wrote very generic statements. So one of them was asking me to navigate a file structure, and I literally said, I don't remember what it's called, but there's a module in the standard Python library that has a function that allows me to do this, and so I'm going to import random, import library, import the library. I'm going to use this function. I just basically declared what the function was called and just moved forward from that. I didn't get the name of the library right, or the name of the function right, but by basically saying that I would, I could hand out some of this stuff to, an external process, and that I was being very explicit about that, I still got credit for it, because of the fact that I was explaining my thought process. And whiteboarding is not about memorizing the syntax. There are so many code linters or code formatters, etc., that it's almost never necessary for you to remember that this method has an S at the end, and if you drop the S, then you're a horrible developer, because the tools that you use will basically go, hey, you dropped an S, you should add back here. And so in short, in whiteboarding, focus on solving the problem, not in actually writing the code, because you could probably get away with almost using straight human sentences on whiteboarding and get all the credit for it still.
I think that's really helpful advice, especially in interviews. That part of the interview process can be very daunting to a lot of folks. So I think that's really helpful advice. So now you've secured the job. What did your first job in tech look like? Or if you'd rather focus on your current job, we could talk about kind of day-to-day life, just your work life as a software engineer or software developer, excuse me.
Okay. So my very first job, as I said, was as a web developer for a consultancy agency that basically does custom software. In that job, I was doing front end and back end. And a lot of that ended up looking, well, we would get features to add to an application. And again, we would have to kind of figure out where in the code flow the feature needed to go, which is where, again, going back to the reading code, where especially as the application gets really large, just finding where the feature needs to go in the code base becomes a task in of itself. So kind of read through the task, read through the code, and then at that point we kind of give estimates of like how long something should take. That is a skill, that a very useful skill that there really is absolutely no way of developing without making lots of mistakes in the short term. You would go, oh, this is going to take 5 hours, and it takes 30 hours, and you go like, oh, this is going to take 5 hours, and it takes 5 minutes. Like, it's just, you will get it wrong, and it's something that, being 5 years into it, I get right maybe 50% of the time still, because everything's kind of connected, and it doesn't always go the way you plan. So give yourself a little bit of grace with that. I kind of joke around that you should take your estimate when starting. You take your estimate and multiply it by 2 pi for the amount of time you spend spinning around in circles. So multiply it by about 6, and also just the other thing that is very easy to forget, especially in the early process, is that writing the code is only usually the first step of the process. Again, it's the reading of the code, and then I don't know if Momentum does this now, but a lot of times you end up having to write what are called tests to basically run the code outside of the application to make sure it works correctly. And depending on the feature, sometimes your tests take longer to write than writing the feature itself. So again, learning how to estimate is going to be a skill that you are just going to have to learn on the job, and that is something that I feel like everybody I've ever worked to or talked to kind of knows and expects to be the case. I think the other thing about my first job, and really even my current job, is that unless you somehow end up in a company where you are the only developer, your time and effort are worth an awful lot. And so while there was a lot to say about trying to be self-sufficient and I can do all the things, if you are stuck at the exact same roadblock for more than like 30 to 45 minutes, you should just ask someone. That's not to say that there's not some sometimes some blocks that are very deep. So like after 15 minutes you fix one problem and you're now onto the next problem, and you're kind of just working your way through all the problems. But if you're literally stuck on the exact same step, this is the exact same minute problem, then probably after 45 minutes you should just ask someone. And that's even more so with junior developers, because the likelihood of you actually knowing the answer is much smaller because of lack of experience. Let's see. And so that was kind of my first job. Even right now, because currently I'm a senior developer, and even as a senior developer, let's see, if we go back to Monday, I had my Scrum meeting in the morning. Basically, what did I work on Friday, and what do I plan on working on today? I ended up doing 2 pair programming sessions where I worked with another developer in tandem, where we wrote a feature at the same time. Pair programming is very useful because you get to learn from each other's coding styles, and you get to kind of make things run a lot faster, because while one person is typing, the other person go, oh, you made a typo, or you dropped a period, or that's not the actual function we want to be calling. Which are all things you will find out yourself when you try to run the code and it doesn't run. But it does kind of speed that up a little bit. I then added a new feature to the code, including with tests, to make sure that I could prove that it was working outside of the code base. And then lastly, I did a few merge requests. So basically, when you when you write new code and you add it to the code base, usually it goes into kind of a bin where someone else reads through the code to make sure that you did all the things you need to be doing. And that is a fairly typical day, I think.
I think that definitely gives some great insight into what life could be like, or what life is like as a software developer. I also think there's definitely some good takeaways from everything you just said, but especially that as a software developer, or just in the tech field in general, in any field, you're constantly going to be learning new things. It's okay to ask help. You should learn from others around you, but especially in a career like software development, asking questions and being open to learning new things every day is key to success.
Exactly.
So anything else you kind of want to add about your job, what your favorite part about being a software developer is?
So I would probably say that I think my favorite part about being a software developer is being able to see problems and actually do things about it. Kind of as an example, we had a process at my current job that was just very crudely done. It was doing all of the checks and then just throwing it into a file, and so you basically ended up with a file that was just lots of nonsense characters that were poorly formatted, and if you had a problem, you had to usually just do Command F and to just try to hope to find the problem. And so I brought that up. I was like, okay, this is a problem. I'm going to fix it. And so I wrote a program that puts them all into nice, easy to read blocks that are color coded. And if there's anything that any action items that need to be done, it copies them to the end of the file. And so you just have to, scroll to the bottom of the file. You're like, okay, these are the things I need to fix. And so that, with programming, I had the tools to be able to fix that problem. And I think that that's one of the things that I think software engineering really kind of lends itself to, is that there are so many knowledge domains out there that could really benefit from help. In my first job, most of what I did were what are called CRUD applications. If you are in the program, that might make a lot of sense. But basically, those are just kind of glorified Word documents that you have a web UI to add and add and remove from and edit and all that stuff. So very, very simple things, but just by creating one of these very simple things that have custom fields that have scientists and research labs that can move from like writing manual notes in a notepad and then having to hope that they can find it later when to reference. They can write it into a very simple web form and be able to use a search function to bring it back up again, and that ends up saving hours for each person over the course of our project. And so it's a very small quality of life changes that we can make that just really kind of take the minutia off of lots of different people.
I love that. That's great. I'm gonna go ahead and just let everyone, if you have any questions or want to think of some questions, I'm gonna ask you, Chris, one last question before I open up for Q&A. Just kind of a final piece of advice or multiple pieces of advice that you would give anyone considering a career change, interested in making a career change to tech, just words of advice or encouragement.
I think words of advice I would just say is, I guess, always be curious. I think it is very easy, especially in this day and age with TikTok and YouTube, where you can see these clips of people doing all the fun things about certain jobs, and like I want my job, my life to be constantly fun. Let's switch over to that career. But especially with things like Reddit and Stack Overflow, there's lots of forums out there where you can be curious, you can ask questions, and see a lot of the good and the bad that comes in the various fields. Software engineering is not always 100% the funnest job, but I think that is literally true with any occupation you could pick out over the sun. And it's definitely a lot more fun than any previous job I had it past my past job history. And so I think kind of trying to be proactive and trying to realize that there's going to be some bad with the good, and bracing yourself for that really kind of helps with the make the leap and kind of have a more realistic honeymoon phase with any sort of career change where you can just keep learning and growing instead of going, this is not what I signed up for, when it kind of was.
I think that's really great advice. Being a software developer working in tech, not every day is going to be pretty, but it's going to be very rewarding and fulfilling. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. Feel free to drop any questions you may have in the chat, raise your hand, unmute yourself, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Maybe we don't have any questions today.
One other thing I think I would like to touch on real fast while we're waiting for any other questions is that we do have a question. I'm a college student and I go to KSU, Kansas State, I'm guessing, or is there some local KSU? Do you have any tips? If we're talking about, I guess, college in general, I would probably say that the thing I would most recommend doing is focus on what they are trying to teach you more than what they are making you do. What I mean by that is that a lot of times, like if you go to a math class, if they're trying to teach you how to do some type of calculus, they're going to give you lots of very specific examples, and sometimes it's very easy to just kind of get into a rote pattern of solving the problem and not actually kind of go, okay, why are we solving the problem? How does solving the problem this way really tell how we solved the problem in the previous section? And kind of trying to gather things into having a purpose. And some of your some of the less fun classes are how you judge fun. Sometimes we're for like a grind, but I think if you kind of try to take a step back and try to find the meaning behind it, it makes things a lot easier. So as at the start of my career as software engineer, is there anything I would have done differently? I think the thing I would have potentially done differently is I think I would have tried to try to practice what's called test-driven development a little bit more. So there's a philosophy in software engineering that's called test-driven development, where, like I mentioned before, a lot of times in code, you write tests to make sure that things work. Test-driven development is the idea of writing the tests first and then writing code to pass the tests. And the thing that's really nice about that is once all your tests are passed, you know that you're done with the assignment. You don't need to keep doing more things, because if you needed to do more things, then you would have had a test for it. But the other thing that's nice about it, though, is once you have tests that pass, then you can change the code to make sure that your new code is just as correct as the old code was. And so it kind of gives you the ability to practice writing things differently and seeing if you like it one way or the other. As far as building a portfolio, I would say the two things that I would talk about when it comes to building portfolio is the first thing I would say is you probably only need one complex thing. So being able to do something simple shows basic competency. Being able to do something complex shows that you can kind of self-manage, and that you can do some of the more complicated stuff. But the other thing that I would really recommend is trying to contribute to open source, because in any personal project you have, you can skip you can skip pretty much all of the software development process. You don't have to answer to anyone, so there's not really any code review. You don't have to run any linting or add any unit tests. And so while your code might run and you have a very pretty site, your code might be full of inefficiencies and full of and not tested. But if you when you contribute to an open source project, a lot of times they will ask you that if you add a feature, you have to also add the tests that go along with it. They always have some sort of merge request system where someone who with experience on the project will review your code and explain to you what you did and didn't do well. And by definition, you will then having to practice soft skills to in communication. So there, as far as going about finding open source projects, there's usually a few sites. In October, there's something called Hacktoberfest. It happens every October, and there's a big site that has projects that are specifically looking for contributors. I'm blanking on the name of the site, but if you if you search open source projects to contribute, you can usually find something fairly quickly. But when I'm talking about open source software, I'm not really talking about Linux and Ubuntu, because those are very system based. I mean, those are both open source, but usually, again, if you're talking about taking a course in Python, there are a lot of Python packages that are used where you're basically letting some other person write the code to better sort a list or better do a task, and you can find all those in the Python package library, and almost all of them will have, especially the big ones, will have a GitHub page which has an issues tab, and the issues usually have some sort of good first time contributor or some other tag letting you know that this is a good introductory thing. How prepared skill-wise did you feel when you actually started working in your first job? I think that is a great question. I think that I think I would probably say factually well, but because you asked how did I feel, not prepared at all. I think imposter syndrome is a very prevalent thing in software development. Even with some of my coworkers who have been doing this for 5+ years, they still make very simple mistakes, or they will express that they feel like idiots for making very simple mistakes. And so it's honestly always is going to probably feel like you're not prepared and you don't know what you're doing. But a lot of that also has to do with the fact that very rarely can you just do software engineering for software engineering's sake. You're almost always doing software engineering, to help with auctions or to help with managing moving trucks or something like that, and having to learn an entire domain on top of fleshing out your software development skills is just going to feel like a lot. But but you really do, Momentum really does give you the tools to hit the ground running, even if it's doesn't feel like it, because you feel like you always are asking questions. But like I mentioned before, if you've already stuck for more than like 30 to 45 minutes, you should be asking questions. And I, even with 5 years of experience now, I still probably ping one of my coworkers and ask a question about 2 to 3 times a day. So the next question talks about what are some jobs that are job titles that are not too far away from software engineering for jobs like for software engineering. We're looking for developers with many years of work experience. One of the things I will always caution people on is there are a lot of adjacent software engineering jobs, but I would never apply to a job with the hopes of it being a different job than in the description. Some people will say, oh, if they have software engineering and like quality assurance or QA, which basically are the people who sometimes write scripts to, test the code from a user point of view. Like, oh, that's adjacent, and you can work for QA for like a year or two and then transfer over to software development. But I have so many friends who have done that, and I don't know of a single one who it actually worked out for. Not that saying it doesn't work out for some people, but I think if you go into QA and then now have 2 years of QA experience, then you still have 0 years of software engineering experience, at least in the minds of some people. Again, those scripting, so you did do some software development, but to a lot of recruiters and people who are the first line of getting you in front of people who actually know the difference, you now have 2 years of QA experience and no software development titles. And again, this also goes down to that depending on the amount of work you have to do for applying to a company, unless they straight out throw the word senior into the job title, I would apply. Because again, there is a lot to be said about the fact that that as a junior developer, your expected pay range is a lot cheaper than other people, and that especially in a lot of fields where between the domains, between the weird programming languages they use or the domain specific information that they use, that whether they hire someone who is a senior developer or hire you straight out of code boot camp, there's still going to be like 3 to 6 months of onboarding and making sure, kind of getting you used to their way of doing things. And so I think you would be very surprised with the number of companies that would be willing to take a gamble if you are eager and can, show that you at least know how to think like a software developer, which I think Momentum does a good job of doing. As far the next one is amateur experience, but not any professional experience. Should I still apply for something that says junior or just entry? Again, this goes back to I would apply to jobs that you feel like you want to do and that you can see yourself getting to that point in 1 to 3 months, because not everyone's junior or entry or internship even all the same. There's a company called Thoughtbot that I think has an office in Raleigh, but all over the world. They have an internship program that is, it's labeled as an internship, but it really feels like you have to have like 2 years of experience working in the languages in order to get to one of the spots, because it is just that competitive. Why, again, there's a number of mid-level positions that I have seen people apply for and get without any experience, even in the language. For example, one of my companies, my first again, when I went through the boot camp, it was Ruby, and so my first company was a Ruby agency, and we hired a number of people who had never touched Ruby before, but knew how to use Python. And again, we were like, between having to learn how we do things in the first place, being able to like tack on learning, the difference between Ruby syntax and Python syntax was just kind of a wash, and how much time they were going to have to spend to get ramped up. So, I mean, obviously, if you don't know Ruby, and after looking at Ruby for the 5 seconds it takes to kind of look at the differences between Ruby and Python, I never want to do Ruby, then don't apply to a Ruby position. But honestly, it is amazing how even if you have Python experience and you want to go try, get apply to a Java position, that is not even completely out of the question. As far as networking go, networking is really useful. I don't know. I definitely would not have got my first job without some networking. And I think it really just depends on. I guess it really just depends on why you're networking. I guess if you're networking for networking's sake, it usually is not very productive. But like if you are networking because you want to hear about other people's projects, and you think they work for a company that you would really want to work for, I think that is where networking takes place. That really helps. So reaching out to people at a company that you would actually want to work for on LinkedIn, I think is a great move. But if you're just kind of throwing yourself out there and like, I just contact me because I just want a job and I'm willing to do anything, I think networking kind of falls to the wayside on there. But yes, definitely working on open source projects, I think, is great. Let's see. I use LinkedIn and Handshake. Do you have any recommendations on where to find other postings? So I found my last job on Polywork. It's a LinkedIn alternative. And they have great postings and a great way of doing it. The other thing I would also recommend is to join any Slacks or Discords of any appropriate Slacks or Discords. There was a Slack channel for PyCarolina, which is basically Python developers in the Carolinas, that has a job board. There is a Slack and a Discord for Triangle developers, which are specifically for all developers, software developers in the Triangle area. They have a very active job posting board. And of course, going to meetups does help a lot. But again, I would just warn you that meetups do have some kind of set agenda. So if you just go to the meetup and try to force it into, please hire me, it's probably going to do more harm than good. But if you go to the meetup and you actively engage in the activity and in the pursuing obvious small talk, when people ask what you're doing, you're like, oh, I'm looking for a job right now. I mean, it will organically come up quite easily and quickly, and is much kind of leaves a much more pleasant encounter than going in there and trying to force everyone to take a copy of your resume.
I can go ahead and take this last question. Can we watch this recording again and view the resources after the live is over? You will be able to watch the recording again. I will be posting this on Momentum's YouTube page, as well as the website. So if you'd like me to send it to you directly, feel free to drop your email or send your email to me directly. But just helpful resources are our website. If you go to www.momentumlearn.com, you should be able to find anything you would need, more information on our courses, applications, as well as information on our NCCU part-time partnership that I mentioned at the beginning of this call. We just opened applications for that today. It's going to be a part-time course for those near the NCCU campus in Durham. So feel free to take a look at If you have any questions, you can also email us directly at info@momentumlearn.com. And I think it's just important to mention as well that our graduates, including Chris, are very involved and always eager to help those interested in momentum or just a career in tech in general. So feel free to reach out to us and we can get you connected with someone who can answer questions or kind of give some insight into their day-to-day life, just as Chris did today. So our next course starts July 10th. So feel free to jump on our website, submit an application, look more into the NCCU opportunity. But for now, I just want to say a huge thank you to Chris and for everyone who joined today. This was a wonderful session. So just thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I'm active on the Momentum Slack, or you can find me on LinkedIn if you have any more questions.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris.
No problem.
Do your day.
You do.
Bye.